As we continue our series on the significance of Christ's resurrection, we see secondly that Christ's resurrection serves as decisive proof of his ministry and claims. Looking first at Matthew chapter 12, verses 38 through 40, then some of the scribes and Pharisees answered Jesus, saying, "Teacher, we wish to see a sign from you. Give us some sort of proof, some sort of evidence to back up your claims and your actions." But he, Jesus, answered them, "An evil and an adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah." So there's all this mention of sign here, evidence, proof. Now he mentions that he won't give this generation a sign, but except for the sign of the prophet Jonah. And then he explains what that is. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, something of a burial or a death for Jonah, we might say, so also will the Son of Man, this term that Jesus uses to describe himself, this term from Daniel 7, so will the Son of Man be, again, 3 days, parallel, and 3 nights, parallel, in the heart of the earth. So as Jonah was in the belly of the fish, the Son of Man will be in the heart of the earth, both of them 3 days and 3 nights. And of course, after the 3 days and 3 nights, that is referring to Christ's death. 3 days later, what of course happens? He is risen from the dead. And so the sign that he will give them, the ultimate sign that he will give them, even though he refuses to give them a sign here, the ultimate sign will be his very resurrection. Secondly, we can look at John 2. Now this is after Jesus cleanses the temple in the Gospel of John. And so in verse 18, the Jews said to him, "What sign," again sign, proof, "what sign do you show us for doing these things? Who gives you the right to cleanse the temple? Who gives you that authority?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" Now, here we see John adds a little bit of an editorial note. In verse 21, he tells us that Jesus was speaking about the temple of his body. And this parallels what we see earlier in the beginning of the gospel, chapter 1. We see that God the Son becoming flesh is said to be his tabernacling among us. Our translations often say he dwelled among us, but it's literally his tabernacling. The idea of what the tabernacle was, and eventually the temple, the tabernacle being the tent version, and the temple being the sort of permanent building version of the tabernacle, but it was the place where God dwelled among his people. He specifically indicated his presence among his people. And the Gospel of John is showing us that Jesus is the fulfillment of what the tabernacle and temple always were meant to be, the dwelling of God among his people. The tabernacle and temple do that in something of a shadowy form. They are pictures, we might say, of ultimately what God would accomplish through Christ. Christ is quite literally God among us. He is tabernacle, and so here Jesus likewise picks up on that theme, and John clues us in that he is talking about the temple of his body. Jesus says, "Destroy the temple of my body, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Therefore, verse 22, when he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The sign that Jesus will give to demonstrate his authority to do things like cleansing the temple is raising his body 3 days after death. And so, as we see, Christ's resurrection serves as decisive proof of his ministry and claims.